Hello, everyone. This is a review for Chapter 42, all about the respiratory and circulatory systems. So here is what you need to know alongside my video for 39 when it comes to the exam. And also please review the book and the provided notes on Canvas. So why are the respiratory and circulatory systems so important? Well, they're exchange and transport centers for oxygen, and oxygen is needed for cellular respiration to take place, and cellular respiration is needed to make ATP, which is energy for all of your cells in your entire body. So oxygen is super important, and you'll learn in detail how important it is more for when you learn about the steps of cellular respiration in detail. But that will come later, so you don't need to worry too much about cellular respiration now. Just understand oxygen is critical for it, and cellular respiration produces energy that your cells and your entire body need. So the respiratory system is responsible for oxygen and carbon dioxide exchange. So you need to take oxygen in to use for cellular respiration, and a byproduct or a waste product of cellular respiration is carbon dioxide, which you need to get out. And the circulatory system acts as a transport network for oxygen and carbon dioxide. And oxygen can be found on red blood cells. In this PowerPoint, I will typically denote it, and it's also denoted in the notes, just RBC for short, white blood cells, platelets for clotting, for wounds, glucose, nutrients, wastes, etc. The steps for gas exchange include ventilation, where you take in the air from the environment into the body via the mouth or the nose and through to the trachea. Then you have diffusion at the respiratory surface at the alveoli. And I think we will talk about more what the alveoli are. And I actually just remembered I didn't put a picture in here, but luckily for you, there's many pictures out there. So from the alveoli, it accesses the respiratory membrane and to the blood. Then we can have oxygen circulating throughout the entire body to get to all of the tissues. Then we have diffusion at the tissues to the cells so that the cells can undergo cellular respiration to make energy. And in mammalian lungs, we first start off with inhalation via the mouth or the nose, passing through the trachea, through the bronchi, which go into the lungs and branch out into the bronchioles. And at the end, we have the alveoli, which are air sacs covered with many capillaries. And remember, capillaries are efficient for gas diffusion because they are very thin, one cell thin. So they have a high surface area for gas exchange. And mammalian ventilation is negative pressure driven. So changes in volume of the thoracic cavity, that's where your lungs and your rib cage is, and the muscles used, lead to changes in pressure. So remember, when we talk about gases, pressure and volume are connected. In a system, if the volume of gas increases, then the pressure also increases, and vice versa. If we're keeping the total volume of the container the same, which we are for the lungs, because your lungs are just one size that can take in air and also exhale air. And the diaphragm is a part of this negative pressure, as well as the rib muscles. So the diaphragm is a muscle below the lungs, and as a muscle, it can contract during inspiration or inhalation, where then there's less pressure on the lungs so that air and oxygen can enter the lungs. And when the diaphragm relaxes, then it puts more pressure on the lungs, which causes the contents of the lungs, such as CO2, the waste products, to be exhaled back out into the environment and out of the body. So how is breathing and respiration controlled? Part of the brainstem. In the brain, the medullary respiratory center controls the respiration rate, your breathing rate. It does this by detecting the pH change in the blood due to changes in the carbon dioxide concentration. So muscles need more oxygen when they are more active. They need more energy, so they need more oxygen to produce more energy. So this causes more CO2 to be produced because you are going through cellular respiration more, causing more waste products like CO2 to be produced. And that causes the concentration of CO2 to increase in the plasma in the blood, which again, the medullary respiratory center can detect because it can detect the pH change. Just a little bit about blood. It has a wide variety of functions, primarily for transport. It transports gases, nutrients, hormones, wastes, immune cells, and antibodies. And it can distribute heat. It's made of primarily of red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and plasma. I feel like I don't know why there's a blank thing here, but oh well. Right, so more details on how respiration works. First is the process of getting oxygen diffused. So red blood cells contain a polypeptide plus iron, an iron-containing molecule called hemoglobin. And this is what transports oxygen. Oxygen creates a concentration gradient, and a concentration gradient just means there are areas of lower concentration of a gas and higher concentration of a gas. And remember, gases will always travel from high to low concentration areas to reach equilibrium so that the concentration is the same in that area. So as the red blood cells travel to tissues, they release oxygen. And we have an enzyme inside a red blood cell called carbonic anhydrase, which stimulates the red blood cell to release oxygen. And this serves several functions. So the concentration gradient of carbon dioxide in the blood plasma is reduced so that it can diffuse from tissue to plasma. Again, because we know that gases travel from high to low concentration. Ions, specifically hydrogen ions, or commonly called protons, since it's just H+, stay attached to the hemoglobin to regulate the pH. And if you've talked about pH in chemistry, you'll understand that these ions determine the pH of a liquid, of a substance, and it's certainly important to regulate the pH in mammals for homeostasis. And then carbon dioxide can be converted to bicarbonate. The bicarbonate ion can act as a buffer for pH in the blood. And so once this is done, once the oxygen has been diffused, now the blood is deoxygenated and it needs to receive more oxygen. So we have to travel back through the veins to the lungs again, where these reactions reverse. So the hydrogen ions are released from the hemoglobin, and then the CO2 reforms to be exhaled out of the body when the diaphragm relaxes. Let me go back. So all of these concepts build in layers. It's very important to understand the processes of respiration. So study and ask yourself, how do tissues get oxygen? First, they have to come from the environment, but where does this oxygen travel? Who transports this oxygen, and what happens so that this oxygen can be diffused to the cells, so that they can undergo cellular respiration for ATP. And I think this is the final concept. So we've talked about it a little bit before when we talked about mollusks. So there's two kinds of circulatory systems. First is an open circulatory system with a hemolymph, which bathes tissues directly and organs directly with fluids and blood. And this is found in low motility organisms like clams, which have low oxygen needs. And then a closed circulatory system has a heart, which pumps blood through vessels to tissues and to cells. And this can be found in active organisms that need more oxygen, such as octopuses, which are predators and very motile. Next, I've added the relevant questions, the practice questions, and like the video in chapter 39, I'm going to be going through all of the questions and explain the answers. But I have taken out ones about like gills, trachea, things like that, because it's not going to be on the exam. So just check the question number over here, and make sure you pause if you want to try these questions before I give you the answer. So number 1 says, the process of uptake of oxygen into the body from the environment and the release of carbon dioxide from body to environment is known as gas exchange. What system in the body is primarily responsible for gas exchange? C, the respiratory system. So these questions, there's a wide variety of strategies to help you have an increased chance of getting the question right. There will be questions that you know 100%, questions that are obvious to you, but the problem is when you're a little bit unsure, it's important to remember you need to cater to the specifics of what the question asks. Now, we talked about two systems in this question, in this chapter, and for this question. For example, the circulatory and the respiratory system. So you know right off the bat that it's not going to be B, D, or E. But which one is involved in gas exchange? And that's the respiratory system. The circulatory system is responsible for circulation of oxygen throughout the body, but the respiratory system exchanges oxygen in and carbon dioxide out. And I'm hoping to talk more about strategies to get the right answer for these different questions as we move forward. 2, which of the following is not a way that closed circulatory systems use to move the respiratory gases, oxygen, and carbon dioxide to and from tissues? D, all of these are methods used to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. So it's asking you to find one that is not that where it's not the case that a closed circulatory system does this. So it says you want to find something that the circulatory system doesn't use to move the respiratory gases, oxygen, and carbon dioxide to and from tissues. So we know that oxygen is transported via red blood cells. And we know that carbon dioxide, it turns into the bicarbonate ion. And we also know that oxygen can dissolve. So all of these methods are used to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide. 3, what is the correct order of processes involving the movement of oxygen from the environment to mitochondria and vertebrates? The answer is A, ventilation, circulation, and cellular respiration. For these questions asking for the correct order of something, there are 2 ways you can start off. If you can figure out what the first step is, then you can narrow these down. So if you know that the first step is ventilation, then that only leaves you with choices A and D. So now you have a 50-50 shot of getting it right if you just guess. Now the other way is if you know the last step. So if you know that the last step is cellular respiration, then you would only be left with A and B. And again, you have a 50-50 shot of getting it right by guessing. So first, we have ventilation, where we're taking oxygen out from the environment, and it's entering through the mouth or nose into the trachea, and then into the lungs. Now from here, the oxygen can enter the blood, and this oxygenated blood circulates throughout the entire body to reach the tissues and their cells, where cellular respiration can take place. So A is the correct answer. 4, which of the following best describes the process of ventilation? And I just talked about this, so maybe you'll have somewhat of an idea. C, the movement of the respiratory medium past the respiratory surface. But the tricky part here is how it's worded. And it's not always going to be obvious how it's worded. So again, if you can eliminate some of the other answers, that can help. So if we want to try eliminating answers, let's look at A. This is the movement of oxygen gas through the blood of the circulatory system. Well, I just said it was circulation because ventilation, we're not to the blood yet. Then B, the movement of carbon dioxide gas through the blood of the circulatory system. Again, we're not to blood yet. D, the diffusion of gases into and out of the circulatory system. We're not really talking about circulation again, because it's asking about ventilation. And then E, the diffusion of gases into and out of tissues where cellular respiration occurs. Well, that's the last step. Ventilation is the first step. So the quantity of air, the quantity of oxygen has to enter through the mouth or the nose into the trachea and go to the lungs. So the answer is C. 5, in which location would you expect the oxygen concentration to be the lowest? D, within tissues. So remember, as blood is traveling through the circulatory system, it's releasing oxygen, which decreases the oxygen concentration. And so if we start off with a what we can call high oxygen concentration at the beginning, we are going to decrease this oxygen concentration over time. So and if we order these steps, these locations really, first the oxygen would be in the environment, which would have a specific starting oxygen concentration. It depends on where you're at, of course. Then it would enter and go to the lungs. Then it would enter the alveoli, and then enter the blood, which the heart pumps to its destination. And so the final destination is within tissues. 8, breathing is primarily regulated by carbon dioxide concentration and pH sensors. So remember, the medullary respiratory center isn't isn't sensing oxygen levels, it's sensing a change in the pH, which is caused by a change in the carbon dioxide concentration. And in response, it causes you to breathe and exhale out this carbon dioxide. 12, air rushes into the lungs of humans during inhalation because A, the rib muscles and diaphragm contract, increasing the lung volume and decreasing the pressure within the lungs. So again, the rib muscles and the diaphragm are muscles which are capable of contracting. And when they contract, they reduce the pressure on the lungs, which allows the lungs to increase in volume and take in a quantity of air. 13, the exhalation of air from human lungs is driven by A, decrease in the volume of the thoracic cavity with an associated increase in thoracic pressure. Other answers you may have thought about would maybe be C, the contraction of the diaphragm, but remember, we're talking about exhalation. And for exhalation, that's when the diaphragm relaxes. It returns to its state, which increases the pressure on the lungs, causing them to exhale out that air. So when they contract, we're actually talking about inhalation. 14, a significant increase in the amount of interstitial fluid surrounding the capillary beds of a human's lungs will cause C, a decrease in the amount of oxygen moving from the lungs into the blood. Now, we have a new and probably unfamiliar term, interstitial fluid. And if you didn't know what this was, just try to think of it conceptually, that what this question is asking. So we're talking about a significant increase in fluid, even if you don't know what interstitial means, in fluid surrounding the capillary beds of a human's lungs. So we have this fluid, and it's now surrounding the human's lungs much more than it was. So we're going to have an increased pressure associated with this. There's going to be an increased pressure on the lungs by the fluid, which means that there's a decrease in the amount of oxygen moving from the lungs into the blood. It's cutting off the oxygen that can move. 15, if the inner lining of the air sacs is neither thin nor highly vascularized, then what can be inferred about the air sacs? So we're talking about alveoli. And remember, alveoli are good with gas diffusion because they have many capillaries, which are very thin, and gas is easily able to diffuse on thin membranes, these capillaries, because of their high surface area. So you could say that the gases are easily able to penetrate that surface. So if they're not thin and they're not highly vascularized, then they're not efficient sites of gas exchange. 16, when you are jogging, your muscles are using more oxygen and releasing more carbon dioxide into the blood than when you are at home on the couch. Which of the following would occur during your jog? C, the medullary respiratory center would detect rising carbon dioxide levels. Again, so the medullary respiratory center senses the change in pH, which is caused by a change in the concentration of carbon dioxide in the blood, and that's caused by an increase in cellular respiration, which is needed if you're very active, because your muscles need more energy, so they need more oxygen, and therefore we're producing more waste products, more carbon dioxide. So this causes you to breathe at a faster rate to get out that waste product faster, and as a result, you're taking in more oxygen, so your cells can do more cellular respiration and produce more energy for your muscles to do what they need to do. 17. In mammals, gas exchange between the atmosphere and the pulmonary blood occurs in the alveoli. Okay, so you may have never seen this term pulmonary blood. Perhaps you've heard of a pulmonary embolism. That's a common medical term. But again, like, consider the context of this question and what is this chapter about? Well, this chapter is about the respiratory system and the circulatory system. And we know that the respiratory system is responsible for gas exchange. So this has to do with the gas exchange between the atmosphere and the blood. So in your head, try to go through the body parts and the steps of gas exchange from the atmosphere and reaching the blood so that it can be circulated. So we'd have the trachea and the bronchi, which branch to bronchioles, and the ending point is the alveoli. 18. In what way does hemoglobin act as a buffer against changes in blood pH? B. Hemoglobin binds some of the excess protons released by carbonic acid. Remember that these excess protons cause a change in pH. So we want to keep this pH stable in the body. We need to maintain homeostasis. So if we can tie up some of these protons that are released by carbonic acid, then they're not changing the pH of the blood. 19. An increase in blood carbon dioxide content causes hemoglobin to release more oxygen molecules E. So remember again, the medullary respiratory center senses changes in carbon dioxide concentration and blood pH. So if we have a higher carbon dioxide concentration in the blood, then the medullary respiratory center is going to have the body respond by breathing faster. And if we're breathing faster, we're going to be releasing more oxygen molecules because we're needing more oxygen molecules for more cellular respiration. Because we're being more motile, we're doing more, so we need more energy, which causes us to produce more carbon dioxide. 20, most of the carbon dioxide produced by humans is converted to bicarbonate ions by carbonic anhydrase, an enzyme in red blood cells. So some of these answers you may be able to easily rule out, such as B. We didn't talk about carbon dioxide binding to hemoglobin. Oxygen binds to hemoglobin. This is kind of just trying to trick you with the jargon. Like, this is like red blood cells, and this is just acid. So carbon dioxide isn't transported like this. And it's not most carbon dioxide. But what is most of the carbon dioxide produced is converted to these bicarbonate ions, acting as a pH buffer. by this enzyme, carbonic anhydrase, which is found in the red blood cells. And I believe this is the last question. Oh, you just had the answer. Anyways, 21, organisms with a circulating body fluid that is distinct from the fluid that directly surrounds the body cells are likely to have a closed circulatory system. So the key here is a circulating body fluid. Now, in an open circulatory system, the body has to bathe the tissues and the organs directly in the body fluid. So we don't really have a distinct barrier between the different body fluids. And yeah, these other answers are more specific than the question's really asking about. So that's the end, and good luck on the exam.